All right. Well, I'm here with Dan Martinez today, my friend. Um, Brilliant mind, one of the most interesting conversations. We always have the most interesting conversations. I don't think we've ever had a chit chat or a boring one. Um, Today seemed timely, given how we met and how we were introduced, and um, some of the same circles that we overlapped in that did make the introduction, and then the statement by out of the White House today or yesterday that um, there was an executive order about the use of psychedelics in treatment for veterans. So you and I were going to talk anyways, and just turned out the universe gave us the perfect topic. So maybe you tell us people about yourself a little bit and who you are and where you come from and um, what your business is, and then we'll take our profession and we'll take it from there.
Yep. Appreciate it, EM. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. My name is Daniel Martinez. I have been an attorney since 2009, based out of Southern California. I was the Republican candidate for Congress in California's 31st district for both the 2024 cycle and the 2022 cycle. And this is where the universe's gift that we were talking about earlier comes into play, because my primary desire to run for office back in 2022 came from uh, really a chance meeting that I had with the special operations community that stemmed back from 2019. And to understand that, really the starting point for the story was that I had a experience with a familial suicide back in 2015, right? And following that incident, what had happened was my father had we don't really know for sure, because you don't really know for these things, but was either jumped, pushed, or fell off a 10-story balcony in his apartment in Chile. And due to just some strange circumstances, one of the security cameras, the CCTV cameras at the bottom, caught the last 20 feet of the impact. So when I went out there to do just my own investigation to see what was going on, I crossed paths with that video. And then originally, the plan was just to have it put on a flash drive and then figure out if I ever wanted to watch it in the future. But Chile's not exactly the United States. So the CCTV system they had, by the time I had discovered the video existed, the security guard told me I had about 8 hours to either copy it onto my cell phone, because there was no way to physically transfer it to a hard drive, or to just know that it existed and then have it disappear into the ether forever. And since that wasn't an option for me, I just decided to actually watch the video and then keep a recording of it. And then that led to what was the classical terminology would be undiagnosed PTSD, just involuntary memory recall. And then over the next couple of years, it had a deleterious effect on my personal life, my professional life. And I was just struggling. It was hard for me to put into words what the experience was like. But over time, I would use the description that in the same way that your house electrical system has circuit breakers, and the circuit breakers are designed for, you could call it sensory overload, like electricity overload, to prevent fundamental damage to the system. What it felt like was your brain has similar circuitry. And
Well,
if you,
it's the cognitive dissonance system, which is very sophisticated. Yeah.
And if you get
Yeah.
to the point where it's a sensory overload, or like whatever overload that you have, the circuit breakers will go off, and then you enter a state of essentially being numb. And when you're in that state of being numb, you start seeking out stimuli, extra stimuli, which then can have deleterious effects onto your life. And so, by chance, I had crossed paths with a brilliant psychotherapist that was working out of San Diego, and her specialty was psychedelic use of psychedelics for PTSD and traumatic brain injury, suicide mitigation. And I started doing the therapies through her. And then what effectively happened was you could flip the circuit breaker back on, right? And then you could connect again. And then as we would sit and do our sessions, I learned a huge amount from her. And then one weekend, or one of our sessions, she looked terrible when we walked in, just disheveled. So just part of my personality and my character, I just started asking her about like what was going on, and we had sort of did a reverse session. And she asked me, she said, "You're a criminal defense attorney?" I said, "Yeah, I am." And she's like, "Well, can I ask you some questions?" I said, "Sure." And it turned out that she let me in onto this background work that she had been doing down in Mexico. And by this point, it's 2019. She let me in this background work that she'd been doing in Mexico with psychedelics in the special operations community. And there was they had the issue with doing it in Mexico was the standards and procedures were lax. A lot of the best practices weren't there, and there had been an incident over the weekend where one of the individuals had taken off in mid experience and headed towards the border, and it could have become a kind of potentially an international incident if things had gone poorly. And so the question that she asked me was, is it possible to do that in the United States? Is there a way that it could be done in the United States? And by chance, I had actually been following the Supreme Court developments in the religious freedom aspect as it ties to psychedelics, just as a side hobby, back since 2006. 2006 was when I was in law school. And at that time, the Supreme Court had taken a case where the DEA had seized ayahuasca that was entering the country, and a church, one of these small churches nobody ever hears about. Most people think they're just weirdo churches, Native American churches, and the Chief Justice Roberts, in a surprising opinion for me, told the DEA he had to give them back. Right, the psychedelics are clearly a controlled substance. That part's not in dispute. But what the Chief Justice had said was that if there's a religious angle to the consumption, a genuinely held, sincerely held religious belief, then the government needs a particularized reason why they cannot give an exemption to this individualized church. And in my personal experience with psychedelics, like there is a physical component to it, but there's also a spiritual component to it. I've never met anybody who sees this as strictly speaking a physical phenomenon. And so I explained this to the therapist and said, "Look, I mean, to the extent that the participants believe they have a sincerely held religious component with this, we can set up a church for those who do have sincerely held religious beliefs. And then once a church is set up, it is possible for secular organizations to do observational studies on those individuals to the extent that everybody volunteers and all the ethics are above board. And there's a way to get it done on a gold standard basis." And that led to an introduction to the special operations community, setting up a few different churches because you have to have the right individuals who it is a sincerely held religious belief for. And then that was 2019. So that was the first time that I got connected with different SEAL groups. I believe I got connected with UEM about 18 months later.
Yeah.
And then at that time, I still remember the day when I went into her office and she was almost giddy. This was 2019. I'm pretty sure this was late 2019, early 2020. And she was giddy because Hunter Biden had gone through the program down in Mexico. So if you can visually imagine this, right? You have the son of the sitting president who's struggled with crack addiction in a way that everybody knows publicly, et cetera. And this is not to this is not to dump on somebody with addiction or to dump on Hunter Biden in particular. But Hunter Biden finds out that there's this program down in San Diego that has enormous benefits for people with addiction, being able to reset brain patterns and to give people a new opportunity at life. And he goes through the program. And that is exactly when he went from crackhead to artist in like the sober looking artist who was able to transition to the next chapter and phase of his life. Like it happened immediately thereafter. And at the time, she was giddy because his father's the president. He has Article 2 authority. there's precedent for the commander-in-chief to be able to do a research study using active duty military personnel, bypassing the FDA, making sure that we could have an 80% reduction in veteran suicidal ideology within a 6-month period to the extent that it gets executed correctly. And there was hope. Like, what more of a better chance could you have access to the president to get what we essentially got yesterday, except for the fact that the sun went through it. And these experiences, for people that aren't familiar with them, are deeply personal. Like, they're like the as you go through it, you're bearing your soul to the people who are there with you. So it's not like he just went there and it was an individualized experience. I mean, he heard the stories of the veterans who and their personal experiences. They heard his stories. It's a deeply personal and bonding experience. And then nothing happened. Nothing came out of the White House. Hunter was never heard from again. It was like you take from the community and you never give back. And that itself was just to be honest, it was an offensive experience because I personally am not from the veteran. I'm not personally a veteran from. I'm not veteran, right? My parents came from Chile during the dictatorship, so I was raised like military service when in my family was tied with the abuses that happened in the military regime. So I was raised on the very much you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to work in finance, and I come from a family of doctors, so I naturally went into law because I didn't really want to follow the same course of everybody else. But I have that integrated in my background. So research and ethics, like all of that's just what I grew up around. So, but yeah, so then it was just disappointing the fact that it didn't seem like the previous administration was going to deliver on this issue. And by chance, in 2022 cycle, the Republican Party wasn't fielding a candidate at all in my local congressional race. This was just what I had observed. And our existing congresswoman was actually had a good reputation within the community. Like, nobody disliked her. She was an 88-year-old woman named Grace Napolitano. She was considered everyone's abuelita. She had been there for God, must have been 20 years by that point. But she was going to run unopposed. So I went down to the registrar's office and said, "Hey, so what does it take to sign up to be the Republican candidate for office?" And they said, "Well, you're a registered libertarian, so you gotta switch party registration first." I'm like, "Okay, so how do you do that in our jurisdiction?" They just handed me a piece of paper. And I said, "Okay." So I signed this piece of paper, and I said, "What's the next step?" Then they said, "You got to take this packet, you collect 40 signatures, and you come back, and then you turn it back in, and then you can be on the ballot for the primary." And it saddened me again a little bit there, because our society has gotten to the point where there's 750 people in a congressional district, 750,000 people in a congressional district. There wasn't one person that was willing to go out to collect 40 signatures and put up a modest filing fee to be able to do this. I said, "Okay, you know what? I'm more than happy to do this." And a pox on both of the parties. I will champion this one issue of because in my anecdotal experience, I had seen an 80% reduction in suicidal ideology from the people that had been going through these various programs that I'd been integrated into. And I figured that the blue-haired lefties out of San Francisco types are generally in favor of psychedelics in the first place. So the bigger sell would be more of the conservative types that are against drug use at all, because they perceive it to be the deleterious effects of it. But the other angle that I had observed was that on the right, people are deeply empathetic and care very much about the veterans. So I created a logo that was based off of a Venn diagram, where you have a red circle and a blue circle that overlap, and then in the middle is where the overlap is the American flag. And the idea was that you aim towards that center of overlap, and something that we used to do that we stopped doing. And I figured that this would be the issue that that emblem would represent, because I could talk to people on the left, and even if they have issues with military interventions or whatever their issues are, they're still open to the idea of science-based psychedelic treatments for whatever benefits those would open up to, those would open up. And then on the right, and this is actually what happened when I spoke to people, and I'm talking people who've never tried drugs in their entire lives. But then the conversation would start by saying like, "Hey, look, are you aware of the veteran suicide rate? Like, if you're aware of this, like, if there is a scientific treatment that would be available, would this is something that you'd be open to studying and studying in an ethical manner?" And then yeah, and so then the reason why nobody had run in my race was the Grace Napolitano had crushed all the previous all the previous people 67-33. It was just considered a long shot race. So this was just more just to get attention onto this issue. It wasn't it wasn't really a shot of actually like winning. And then I ended up closing the first time around at 41%, and then I ended up closing up the second time around at 45%, somewhere in that range. And so it just showed that if you can stay away from the nuts on the extreme, and you can actually focus on a message for the center, then you can actually make a difference. But you have to be bringing actual solutions. And so, and that's basically how we got into the present. And then I ended up speaking at conferences because it's like I love the special operations community, but one of the things that I've noticed over time is that most of you guys are not selected for your storytelling abilities. There are good storytellers amongst you, and when I find you guys amongst each other, the stories are amazing. But most of the time, you guys are selected in part because of discretion and
For doing the things that make good stories.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
that you can't talk about.
that you can't talk about.
Yeah, yeah. So, you had to the race, you had a rather good showing for somebody who was self-funded and completely self-backed and everything that you were doing
Yeah.
in a deep, deep, deep blue part of the country.
Yeah, and the Republican Party, especially in California, hated my guts. Like
Yeah.
that first year, I got zero. I mean, it was less than zero support because as far as they can, I had worked for Tulsi Gabbard's campaign
Mm.
in the 2020 cycle when she was running for the Democratic nominee, because at that time of my life, I was thinking, okay, the Trump administration is the most open-minded towards the psychedelic world and this type of treatment than I'd seen. They hadn't been making significant moves, but Tulsi Gabbard, just having met her and having met her internal team, is just genuinely one of the best people that I've met in politics, hands down. Just sheer integrity. And that just stems from the fact that she was a combat medic, right? And so she saw the, I mean, when her telling of it, it's like she saw the children in Syria. They were the collateral damage to to what was going on. And she started to reevaluate what her role was in this entire process. And so then she runs for Congress. I think this was back in 2012. And she catches lightning in a bottle. I mean, her father was in politics, so she had an infrastructure that she'd inherited. But then she ends up being a Democratic, a new rising star. Ends up, they make her, I think it was vice president. It was whatever it was. I'm pretty sure it was deputy vice president, something along that in the DNC in that initial cycle with 2016 cycle with Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, and she ends up resigning, saying that the internal game is rigged. Like they're stacking the decks against Bernie Sanders in what's supposed to be a neutral primary. So I'm out. I can't do that. I'm here to serve my country, right? Which is how she's made her journey into the role of director of national intelligence in the Trump administration, the opposite party, which is part of the reason why I was supporting her in the first place, because her integrity, her internal guidance compass is that strong that if she's given an opportunity to be in a role to be able to do what she does best, right? She's gotten a lot of flack in recent weeks, especially from political opponents of the administration, because of the administration's policies and actions in Iran and Venezuela, which are contrary to what her public statements towards Iran and Venezuela foreign policy in the past. And her response was not surprising from my end as somebody who knows her, which is she said, it's not my role as director of national intelligence to set policy and to make determinations for foreign policy in Venezuela and Iran. That's just not my role. My role is, I mean, she didn't say it exactly this way, but my
Yeah.
role is fundamentally I'm the
You're informed.
librarian. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, she's like, I'm the
Yeah.
librarian of the classified information system
Yeah.
within the United States.
Yeah.
So it's like there's the FBI section, and then there's the NSA section, and then there's the CIA section, and I'm the one that's making sure that all of this
There's
is
17,
accessible.
yeah, 17 sections at this point,
Exactly,
plus
it's
all the
17.
subsets. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and after 9/11, when the different sections were not talking to each other, the DNI was created so one person could have access to all of it. So the
Yeah.
president could go to one person and say, "Hey, I need all the information that all the 17
Yeah.
have on this
Yeah.
point." And so at no point does somebody go to the librarian and say, "Hey, should the president make a determination that Iran is an imminent threat?
Yeah.
What do
Yeah.
you think? And if you
Yeah.
disagree with what the president's doing, are you going to resign?" And she's like, no, my job is to, if the president asks me all the information that we have on this group that's operating in Iran, I need to make sure that I have everything that all of the 17
Yeah.
different agencies have.
Yeah.
And what you had seen prior to Tulsi's nomination for DNI was that different aspects of the intelligence group, the intelligence world, had been weaponized for political purposes. So there was information that was being hidden in certain parts of the library that were poison pills that were being put in there specifically to be used to
Right.
target political enemies. And so Trump and Trump did not hire her in the first term.
Yeah.
And look, I love Tulsi to death, but fundamentally she's a combat medic and she wasn't a general. And that's part of what affected the fact that she's not going to be put as head of a 50,000 person agency. It's not the way that her brain works. But what she has her massive superpower in is integrity. And the thing for DNI more than anything is you need somebody that has integrity who'd be willing to call out any sort of misconduct, even from their own side, and would be willing to resign in the face of it. And that is the what pattern that she had demonstrated over time.
You
So.
have to have one other superpower, in order to have in that level of integrity in a utterly manipulated reality of the world. You have to have unbelievably proven, not just capable, but proven discernment,
Yeah.
so that you can look across the 17 different silos. And there's more than that. Those are
Yep.
just
Yep.
the accumulation up, right? But you
Mm.
can look across the 17 different primary silos, and you can discern the deception in one or more of the silos and the skewing of that deception. Then you have to provide a summation of those 17 with the articulation of confidence levels, right? And, the articulation of this is skewed and that's skewed, or we perceive that it's being skewed in this way or this way. Here's how we've confirmed or denied, et cetera. And then provide the executive and his close team with the ability to make the most informed decision that they can make.
Yes.
But that all requires a highly, highly proven capacity for discernment, and specifically discernment as relates to deception.
Yes. Yes. And that's something that she just has as an inherent trait.
Yeah. Awesome. I've never met the lady, so
Yeah.
much respect to her. And I think she's doing a great job. And the way in which Trump backs her and supports her, I think,
I think arguably she may be the most important cabinet nominee that got through the confirmation process.
probably.
Because she was by far one of the most difficult because she had to get approved by Senate Intel,
Yeah.
and Senate Intel, I mean, their hands aren't exactly clean.
Well,
So
it's not that that their hands aren't clean. They're all direct CIA plants.
yeah. No, that's the thing is that there's
Yeah.
going back to 2015, going back to 2016, the misconduct that is within. I mean, one of the silos is Senate Intel, and another silos was Schiff's committee in the House, and you're just starting to see coming out now. Like I think it was Atkinson's the Inspector General report that was buried for damn near a decade now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's your, so now we have an executive order to do a
Mhm.
study, I think, right? It's a request for a study, so it's not approval. Still got to have the study, but I haven't read it. Just popped up today and just came to my awareness just before we started
Yeah.
talking. And again, we were scheduled to talk today anyways, so just interesting timing. I do want to
Sure,
go
sure.
back and
But if we can,
yeah,
what you just said right there, if we could spend a little bit of time articulating on that, I mean, expanding on that a bit, because you're saying that you're not exactly sure what the scope of the executive order is.
yes,
And
yeah,
I've spent 10 years thinking about this, of what my dream scenario, this is my dream scenario,
yeah,
which I
okay.
think that this administration could deliver with, Secretary Kennedy and President Trump, right? But
Well,
it's,
and their successors, because if you look at the people behind when this is happening, Joe Rogan and others. So what's happening is the elder generation is giving permission for the first time ever in our country, at least since the DEAs existed, for the younger generation to, do a formal study outside of pharma, outside of,
yeah,
the controlled environment. But it's for the next generations, the millennials and the Xers to pick
yes,
that up and
yes,
to
yes.
continue the work. Yeah. So, but go ahead.
Yes,
So what's your
but
ideal? What's your ideal?
this is my ideal environment, and I
Yeah.
and I also want to give a bit more background. So when I was an undergrad and when I was through law school, I was the representative on the institutional review board of my university, the student representative on the institutional review board, which is the group that oversees ethics on human subject experimentation. So I have that in my bones from my educational days that if you're going to do human subject experimentation, like research on human subjects, you have to have gold standard research. You have to have gold standard ethics in your research, and that's very important because in everything, we have countless examples through the COVID experimentation that was done on humans, and what passes for transgender reassignment treatments. Uh, all of this has skipped has thrown ethical guidelines to the wayside almost entirely. And people forget that the reason why we got those ethical guidelines, which are called the Nuremberg Code, is because of the medical community getting co-opted by the popular sentiment and authoritarian impulses of the Nazi regime during World War II,
Say
which
nothing
led
of the Japanese and
to say, yeah,
their
I don't
ethics.
have to
Yeah,
say,
yeah, yeah.
but we're just talking about
Yeah,
medical
yeah.
experimentations that were done that were absolutely horrific. That the entire medical community in Germany, and Japan as well, but focusing primarily on Germany, went along with. They got co-opted in it. Most all of these individuals, they weren't like card-carrying Nazis. They weren't members of the military. They were co-opted into participating and conducting this research. So in the decades that followed, the reflection back onto this was how could we inoculate the medical community to prevent this type of abuse from happening again. So then the Nuremberg Code is articulated, which fundamentally at its core has informed consent. Right, informed consent has two primary components to it. Information. It's not just that they say yes, do it. You have to give them sufficient amount of information, like all relevant information that you have, all known risks, all potential risks, limitations on potential benefits, and you put all of that into the individual's mind so then they can make a conscious choice. And then the individual has to have the capacity to consent. And so that's where the minors become a very big issue, because our society, politically speaking, has been torturing this idea of age of majority. Right? If it's a political issue that you think that the kids should be doing, then you just lower the age of majority. Right? And if it's something you think that the kids shouldn't be doing, you just raise the age of majority. Right? So if it's guns or tobacco or alcohol, then you have to be 21 to be able to do it, because your brain's not developed enough to be able to understand the long-term consequences of what you're doing. But if it's abortion, or if you want to cut your if you want
Your
to
genitals off.
cut your genitals off,
Yeah.
then we
7 is
support that.
good.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah, 10. Yeah, then you might as well go down to 11, 12. I mean, 12 or 11,
yeah,
right? And in so doing, we've lost that there is a natural law reason that goes behind all of this, which is
yeah.
fundamentally do you, the individual, have a capacity to project 20 years in the future and compare two different realities and understand how your actions today will put you on track towards one versus the other? And because we've politicized the term, we've lost that there actually needs to be a line in society where you draw, where you treat somebody as an adult, and below that you treat them not as a ward. And the
So
parents, and if I can make one last
yeah, yeah,
point on
yeah,
this,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Is that we've also mixed up concepts, because people, you hear this all the time when it comes to children and controversial medical research. It's that, well, what if the parents consent, right? So, well, technically speaking, parents don't consent for their child. Technically speaking, parents assent for their child, because the parent, the only person that can consent is an adult for themselves, because it's their body. They have to live with the consequences forever. And they can only do that when they reach the age of majority. Prior to that, the parents hold in trust that assent power, like that the future consent power of that future child until they're 18. They can't say you can just because you cannot consent for your 16-year-old to do pornography, right? There's a limitation. An 18-year-old can consent for themselves, but you cannot, as a parent, consent for your child to do something to that level. You cannot consent them to have unnecessary medical procedures. There's limitations to it. You have to hold their consent power in trust to minimally harm them until they reach the age of 18, where they then, in a free society, can make whatever bad decisions that they would like to do. Right? So we've just bastardized so many concepts into this, which is part of the reason why I think our society needs controversial human subject experimentation done correctly, which goes back to my dream scenario for the psychedelic research, because I'll be the first person to admit that A, it's human subject experimentation because there's human subjects. That goes without question. B, it's controversial because in the past there has been abuse through MK Ultra and all sorts of different types of psychedelic like
Yeah,
program
yeah,
abuses
yeah,
in the past, that we
yeah.
need to have protocols in place to make sure that that type of abuse doesn't exist, not to mention just the general abuse that exists in medical human subject experimentation in total. And the other beautiful thing about this is even the FDA doesn't even really need to be involved, because there was the gold standard in ethics for military experimentation is the Minnesota semi-starvation experiment that was conducted during World War II, right? And so as World War II was developing and eventually became clear that the Allied powers were going to win and the Axis powers were going to collapse, we suddenly were faced with a problem, which is when an authoritarian regime collapses, logistical lines collapse, food lines collapse, and you're going to end up with mass starvation throughout an entire continent of tens of millions of people, civilians that weren't necessarily part of the war effort. On the other side, they're just going to be caught as collateral damage, literally starving to death. So the commander in chief at the time authorized a very controversial research from a philosophical sense, because it's like I need participants, and the Hippocratic Oath generally says do no harm. But the research, by definition, is we will take you to the point of starvation and death, and then study how the starvation affects your body, and you, individual, will receive zero benefit from this. You could die. You will suffer. You may have lifelong implications for this, but your chances of benefit from this personally are zero. Collectively, as a species, we might be able to save tens of millions of lives, but you individually will suffer pain for no benefit for you. Right. And so that makes it ethically controversial in the studying sense. But the way that controversial human subject research can still happen, as long as you're honest and cognizant of the risks involved, and you have full informed consent. Meaning, this cannot be done on children who don't have the capacity to consent. You have to have adults. And when you have adults, you have to be honest with them about exactly what I'm explaining. Like, this benefit is not for you. This benefit is for the cause. And you have to be able to volunteer or not volunteer to do this. And that's exactly what they did. They went to the um, the terminology, the conscientious objector, I don't know if it's a core, but the group within the military that does not believe that that they can take human lives or be
Yeah.
part of guns, but they can be part of the logistical apparatus of the organization. And they said, look, we have this research that needs to be done that could save tens of billions of lives. It's going to be very harmful for the people who are going through the experience. However, it's not going to be as dangerous as if you're in the trenches or the front lines, right? Like it will be less dangerous than that, and we need volunteer subjects for this. We need volunteers for this, and they got volunteers. And there's a great video available on YouTube where it's 30 minutes. They interview all of the original participants. They, in their 70s, 80s, talk about how it was the most valuable thing that they've ever the most like. What is it? The most valuable war effort that they were participated in. They had nothing but positive memories of contributing back to it, even though it was painful. And then how it was done was every single observable metric they took. Like, so each individual that was going through this study, they took blood samples. They had heart monitor readings. They had brain scan readings. Every single metric that was observable, they did at the time. It was very different than the research we do today, which is like you study a drug, but you study one very specific aspect of the drug, and you don't really pay attention to all of the other different ways that it affects your body. So then after the drug gets released on the market 10 years later, it ends up getting pulled from the market because even though it does do the thing that you studied, you didn't realize that, okay, it was helping your insulin level go down, but it turns out that it spikes your heart attack risk by
Yeah.
2000%. We didn't
Destroys
figure
your
that out
kidneys.
after 10 years.
Yeah.
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 So after that research was done, there were these volumes of books that came that are still being studied today. And it's also important because the ethical gold standard in research. So using that as the model, right, the commander in chief can, at any moment, say, I want to do the research necessary on this with psychedelics in my role as commander in chief, making sure that I need because the veteran community they're not civilians. They're veterans they're called veterans for a reason, because if there is
Volunteer
if
more
there's a
than yeah.
World War III, they can be reactivated before the general population because they do have enough training to be able to step into the role of what would be necessary relatively quickly. So from a national security standpoint, making sure that the veteran community is as mentally prepared to be able to do anything is a national security imperative. So the president under commander-in-chief authority could absolutely approve this research study, 1.1, meaning that they could bypass any of the regulatory red tape. It could be done with the efficiency of the Manhattan Project if necessary. And then the question is the volunteers, right? Well, I've hung around a lot of veterans from a lot of walks of life in this space, and this is where the VA comes in, because the VA essentially has maximum access to the veteran community, and FDA phase 3 study, which is like the maximum study that gets done at the FDA right now, will be in the tens of thousands, so 10 to 40,000 individuals. Well, the VA has access to millions of veterans. And if you just anecdotally from the hundreds or so that I've crossed paths with, of the hundreds that I've crossed paths with, you'd have a 90% volunteer rate to participate in this type of research. So you'd easily be able to fill that $30,000 to $40,000 person volunteer requirement. That wouldn't be an issue. And then you could institute an institutional review board that could be blue ribbon panel, national, right? And then you would have HHS. The other thing that the VA has is they have 1,100 hospitals strategically. And I mention this because the hospitals are capital intensive to do research, because we want to make sure that the research is cost effective. There's 1,100 facilities that are strategically placed around the country that already have the capital intensive equipment, the MRI machines, the CAT scan machines, the labs to be able to do that. And so you already have these 1,100 different research collection sites. And then you have the HHS to be the central, like they're the ones that actually structure the research, the data that's collected, to make sure that it's harmonized across all of these different regions. And this can all be done within a relatively reasonable, I mean, all the pieces are already there. It's just taking a precedent like the one that we have, in the same way that Space Force was created. Like Space Force wasn't created out of nothing. It was, all the pieces were just lying around. And it just took somebody to say, let's execute this, put a name on it, and make it happen. And all the pieces are here. And I'm hoping that this executive order, especially if the pharma influences, which are the ones that really don't want this to happen, can be neutralized. If we can actually get the full research project online before the president leaves office.
So General Schubert, I think is his name, was Mengele's boss's boss.
Hmm.
He
Okay.
was a straight up Nazi.
Yeah.
He was the head of Nazi medicine. Everything that happened in Germany under Nazi Germany was directly under his command. That was both in the public sector and the private sector. He was brought in under Operation Paperclip to work directly with General Armstrong, who was the head of Army Air Force Medical. The U.S. medical system comes direct, as we know it today, this massive 20+% GDP, which actually should be on the liability side, not the asset side, but this massive bloated, inhumane slave system, because that's what the modern medical industry is, right? Enslaving your cells to the healthcare industry, is a direct result of the head of Nazi medicine and the number one military doctor in the United States.
Wow.
So trying to, and this is public record, by the way, right? So people can look, I think Annie Jacobson talks a little bit about it in her book, Operation Paperclip. There's others as well. Okay.
Yeah, she's brilliant.
Yeah. So I have watched this attempt for psychedelics in the veteran communities, particularly in the special operations community, since Vietnam. I remember it. This is part of why my mother, part of the circles my mother moved in San Francisco and the Bay Area. And then when we bought the land up in Washington, by the time in the 80s when we moved to northern Idaho, she was all out of this. But I've watched since the early 70s when I can remember, and have been around this attempt to, heal the wounded through natural means. And I have watched how it's been suborned, subverted, corrupted again and again and again, both from internal forces and external forces. So I want to deal with the medical, so while I applaud your knowledge of the system and desire to use the system, they will make sure that it fails. And they're going to make sure that it fails in two ways. One, they're going to write the standards for the study in such a way that the study will never have any chance of succeeding.
Yep. I've seen that. Yep.
And then they're going, because it'll be somebody or some subset connected directly to pharma and the modern medical industry, right? Cedars-Sinai or somewhere else, because they have the credentials. And then the way in which the study is also carried out will corrupt the data, because the VA has done that many times. The other thing the VA will say, because it's actually true, is they can't even keep up with the load of veterans now.
Yeah.
It's 3 to 6 months out on things that should have, taken a couple of days, et cetera. So they're going to, and then pouring more resources into the VA is also proven to not be a success.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then there's all kinds of other nefarious ways in which, they'll make sure that this doesn't succeed, to include sending people into the study to volunteer for this study who will then intentionally freak out.
Yeah.
Or intentionally have deleterious results. I've watched all this since the 70s.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Everything every single thing that you're describing, I have seen since I have been watching this. And it's been a frustrating experience, because you're on the one side, you're seeing these amazing stories, the testimonials that I'm sitting on. It's the literally life changing, like literally lives
saved my life.
Families, like restored relationships between husbands and wives, children and their and the service person. That it's phenomenal, but also you can feel it's easier to feel it than it is to really put your finger on where it's coming from. I mean, obviously, pharma is going to lose quite a bit from the you. It's very interesting to hear people who were like, I was on SSRIs, or I was drinking, or I was smoking, or whatever I was habitually forming, I was habitually consuming, and then
Self-medicating. Yeah,
in
yeah.
one day,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
they go back to the person that they were before. You see the change in the face.
The guy that got me down to that same program down there through that same therapist, by the way, who's the lady who saved my life, quite literally, that one lady. Um, Now she was part of the group, right? But she was the one that really, I'd never had anybody get inside my head before my
Yeah,
entire
yeah,
life, ever. That woman did, which I ain't gonna lie, scared the living hell out of me,
yeah.
right? Scared the living hell. But I went down there with that same treatment down in Mexico, um, with a bunch of special operations guys, and I think one intel guy, but the community, right? And that one weekend saved my life. Now there's been a lot of work because that's the other thing about because I've been with the National Foundation for Integrative Medicine ever since, actually since about 2019. There's a whole lot of other things that have to happen, but these treatments help immensely. And one of the things, very much to the last point you made, one of the things is it's not just helping guys no longer self-medicated. We've had guys that were able to get off 7 to 15 different medications that they were taking. And the astounding thing is that normally just to do that takes some massive awareness on their part where their life or their body's collapsing because they just can't take any more chemicals that act against other chemicals. And then they have to titrate off sometimes over 2-3 years. And some of them have become so habituated to certain pharmaceuticals, they can never get off of them. Some of the SSRIs, et cetera, depending on when they went on, and it's a whole slew of things. But I have watched these treatments, particularly psilocybin and iboga. I have watched those two help people get off multiple drugs in weeks or months completely and never go back on. Right. So it is a huge impact in the industry because the VA's sole purpose is to push drugs to veterans and make the government pay for it. Right.
And that's where it's a multi tens of billions of dollar a year industry that could see it again.
30 billion. The VA, if I remember correctly, the VA's pharmaceuticals is something like 30 billion a year.
And in a philosophical sense, if the suicidal ideation dropped by 80% and the pharmaceutical consumption dropped by 80% and costs dropped by 80%, that's when individuals that are going through this from all stripes are just looking at this like, oh, this is amazing. Like that's a win. That's a win. That's a win. However, pharma's stock price would drop 80%.
And the medical industry writ large, because there's all kinds of issues. Because again, pharma leads to other medical issues, and you got to have other pharma and et cetera. So it's not just pharma, right? The whole medical industry comes out of Nazi and Japanese practices in World War II. It just legitimized them by giving them the structure and forum of this healthcare industry.
But let me ask a kind of question in that vein. Do you see any nefariousness being foreign influence designed to prevent readiness in our veteran community? Like that? Okay, so it's not that.
No,
it's not that.
It's that it was designed this way specific. Okay, so they took the very best knowledge and practices, and they put a healthcare industry, medical treatment, industry wrapper on it, and legitimized a lot of the things that the Nazis were doing and had tested and proven.
Got it.
They monetized it. So what they took is they took the bet, and it wasn't just the Nazis, by the way. The Japanese, I can't remember the unit, 707 or something like that, did extraordinary things, even worse than on par with the Nazis. And they took all of that knowledge of biophysiology, biomolecular, bioelectrical systems, neurology, and all of that, and they institutionalized that in the form of our healthcare industry. So it is the industry by its very nature, right? So you mentioned something earlier. For all intents and purposes, the Hippocratic Oath died in the 1930s. Died. and we haven't been operating except some doctors, and I too come from a family of doctors on my
Yeah.
mom's side. And I
Yeah.
didn't go into law. I thought about it,
Yeah.
but I went into tech, right?
Yeah.
For the same reason. It's like, I don't want to be a doctor. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just and it's just
Yeah.
like just listening to the doctors describe how far their medicine, how the practice
Yes.
of medicine. I mean, this is one thing I would like to kind of to just express since we're
Yeah.
discussing in a format that other people are going to understand is that if you there's the theoretical concept of the practice of medicine and the theoretical concept of the business of medicine, right?
Yes.
Is that in pure medicine, you're not even thinking about money. Like the thought never crosses your mind. You are a
Correct.
healer, and
Correct.
somebody comes to you and says, I need something like I saw this ad on
Yeah.
TV and
Yeah.
I want this thing and you're like, no, you don't need that. Goodbye,
Yeah.
get out of here.
Gonna
I'm
mess
not.
you up. It's gonna hurt you. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I will
Yeah.
say I will not be the person that participates in this. Period.
And
Hands
then
down. I
that
don't.
person goes and complains to the medical board and puts a ding on your medical license.
Exactly right. So there's that angle to it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then on the flip side to it is you have the person that walks in with the Taco Bell work shirt, getting off a big shift, and they're complaining about X, Y, or Z, or they have their child in their hands, and their child has a fever, and the first question that gets asked to them is, "Oh, who's your health insurance provider?" And if there's no way for us to be able to monetize this, then we're not going to be able to help you. Like that is a bastardization of medicine, and then all professions are that way. The law is this way too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's the the
Everything's
the, the
corrupted.
practice of the law,
Yeah.
and then there's the business of the law.
Yeah.
And if they can work in harmony in a yin yang balance, then you can get to optimal results. But in many of our professions, there has been a distortion where it's the business of that takes over, and the practice of is almost non-existent. And you're seeing this I've never seen a clear example of this than in the healthcare system, in what has emerged within my lifetime, not even my entire lifetime,
Yeah.
within the
Yeah.
past
Your
15
adult
years
lifetime. Yeah.
in the trans space, right? Because
Yeah.
it's like I'm not even one of these like extremists who will say that, because again, I came from the controversial human subject experimentation world, in that even the thing that has no benefit for the participants can be proven. So if you want to study a theory that cutting off your genitals and having a cosmetic procedure to have alternate genitals will lower your suicidal ideation over time, right? As much as I, on a personal level, think that will be an abysmal failure similar to the frontal lobotomy things of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, I wouldn't go so far as to categorically prohibit the research to be done at the highest ethical standards. You would just have to have all adult participants. You would have to explain to them that this is entirely experimental. You guys are lab rats going through
You would
this.
also have to go through every means you could possibly to address mental health issues
Yes,
to
yes, there would be
ensure that they're sane, truly sane.
those all you there's a you the way that I heard it described is you will have to climb a mountain over the next 2 years.
Yeah.
You'll have to fix the relationship with your mom, fix the relationship
Yeah.
with your dad,
Yeah.
have a job, work on your friend groups. If you have all of those different domains
Yeah. Yeah.
allocated for,
Yeah.
and you still want to do this, you want to be the front runner, you want to be the
Yeah.
person that does this. Hey, look, and you know that there's a chance. There's a likelihood
And
that
there's
you may.
no going back. There is
There's
absolutely zero going back.
zero
Yeah.
going back. Your suicidality may increase,
Yeah.
will likely
Yeah.
increase. There's no evidence to
Yeah.
show that it will decrease,
Yeah.
right? Full honesty
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's necessary. Then you could have the initial 100 or 10 or whatever, the group of whoever can cross that threshold. And then the question is, we're going to study you for your lifetime. Because if
Yeah.
you're going to make a statement like your suicidality will go down over your lifetime, we have to study you over your
We have to
lifetime.
validate that over your
And this
lifetime. Yeah.
and this appeared in 10 years, and then all of a sudden you have statements coming out saying like, "Oh, your suicidality rate will go down." Really? You know that within 10 years, huh? Like that's not possible to know
Uh,
within 10 years.
Unfortunately, many of them kill themselves before 10 years.
but that's part of the
Yeah,
and then you have do you want a live daughter? Do you want do you want to rather have a dead son or a live daughter? And I'm like, wait, and I'm going back to my I was on an institutional review board, right?
yeah,
At my school, even if the like if you wanted to do a written experiment where they just fill out paperwork with incoming freshman psychology students. It had to get approved by an institutional review board, and we ran it by the compliance with the Nuremberg Code, right?
yeah,
And we're doing this with simple written
yeah,
questionnaires.
yeah,
And then all of a sudden, I'm like, wait a minute, you said what to them? You, the medical professional. I can only blame the parents and the participants so much
yes,
when you have the
yeah.
medical professionals
Well,
outright emotionally manipulating them to get the desired result so they can
when
create an industry. Yeah.
someone does not, it's the same as with the military. If you do not adhere to your oath, you have no rights whatsoever to conduct yourself in the context of the profession that oath is for.
Yeah.
It's the
And that's
same with,
it.
mhm, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then the logical outcome of that, right? It's like you
yes,
eliminate the ethical safeguards. It's like, these are patient protections, right? Like it's
right,
like
yeah,
this is not like this is an unfair regulatory burden, red tape that we're
yeah,
doing to interfere.
yeah,
It's like this is
yeah.
like you have vulnerable populations here. These are people that are
This
actively
is
suicidal,
do no
and
harm part.
yeah, yeah,
Formally. So I want to touch on something real quick here, because I've seen this play out in many different ways. But there is, you know, the modern world is an abnormality, particularly the modern world and the English speaking peoples in European world, right?
yeah.
And those aren't exactly the same. But in fact, we've been at war with one another for 2,000 years straight. But other than that, um, there is a subset of the populace who are not fighters, and they're not necessarily terribly intelligently or physically capable. And so they don't really have any other way to sacrifice to contribute to the tribe, but through their own sacrifice. And so that we don't recognize that urge in certain people anymore. Right. These were the ones that would get killed when the raiding party came, or they'd be war brided, or they would be, um, destroyed or raped or killed or whatever. Um, when I look at both the trans thing is over the top, but I see some of this in there, right? How else can I sacrifice for the tribe? I also see it though in the in the post-service special operations community. I can no longer sacrifice, excuse me, in this martial way. The neurological damage means I also probably can't sacrifice in the form of leadership and, personal sacrifices there. And so how else do they sacrifice for the whole, for the tribe? And so I've seen guys go down some of these pathways, choose these types of things that they weren't ready for,
Yeah.
and they get preyed on. So one of the other things that I've seen in the psychedelic space specifically, and the veteran space, because I met a lot of Green Berets, a few SEALs when I was younger. And again, this was during Vietnam, during the last years of the war, and then very much after, up through, I would say, the early 80s, when we stopped, whenever we moved off of the land in northern Washington. So that probably would have been somewhere between 79 and 81. I don't know. It all runs together. I don't have much memory of all that time. Wasn't happy. But one of the things that I noticed very much, and even in the community that you and I have overlapped with, although never at the same time, but there are deceivers. There are people who prey emotionally, psychologically, predatory wise on the special operations community and in first responders and and more importantly, not even us, because that's harder, but I have watched these manipulative, deceptive people get involved, from doctors all the way down to just shamans and, or wannabe shamans, etc., who get into these communities. And because we want to believe and, we want to follow the spiritual path, and you and I know one in common. I think that's the
Yeah.
individual that
Yeah.
introduced us, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
um, I have watched so much deception, parasitic deception, since the early 1970s in this space. And that's from, again, certified licensed professionals all the way to just,
Yep.
apparently good-hearted kind of people. On the other side, I've also equally destructive and what normally provides the vector, right? Um, as the Japanese say, the shikaku, the entry point, right, for these types is the naivety of people who aren't, the naivety of most of the people who are drawn to the psychedelic space and this psychedelic healing recovery, which I'll touch on a piece here. But uh, again, you and I were introduced by one of these very deceptive people.
Yeah.
Um, um, I won't say
If,
where,
if,
but yeah,
if I can chime in, right? Because
yeah, please, yeah,
I'm hearing there's two different points that I'd like to
yeah,
address from what I've heard, right? One of them is the um, to optimize outcomes, and you had hinted on this a bit earlier too, for people that go through a psychedelic experience, because that's a single day's experience.
no,
But no, what I'm saying, but
yeah, yeah,
I mean, the fun, you can do a psychedelic in a single day, right,
yes,
and have a
yes,
single day experience.
yep,
But that will say fundamentally like reset a lot of your brain patterns. But it's what happens afterwards
yes,
that's crucially important,
yeah,
and it's very rare to see a system that's fully integrated to have the post integration system done correctly, because that's
yes,
a very difficult thing to do.
yes,
And one of the issues that you tied into as well is that a lot of these individuals who are willing to sacrifice themselves in battle, willing to sacrifice themselves, who have a rescuer spirit, right? Who
yes,
want to
yeah,
want to
protective,
do
yeah,
something, yes.
yeah,
But then they leave that world and they go back into the civilian world. There's not really a place for them here, right? One of the things that I had heard, which this is more specific for veterans and more specific in the VA and more specific to the suicide mitigation space, mental health, right? In physical health, we have emergency med, we have you have your physicians, right? But then we have an entire network of less credentialed individuals who are more numerous, who run ambulances, fire squads, so they can maximize the reach of doctors. Because you'll have
yep.
a finite amount of doctors, but then you'll have these groups that can provide emergency
Yeah,
intervention,
well,
that can have
nurse practitioners and
yeah,
this
or
whole
as little as
physician's assistants.
and
Yeah,
as little as an EMTB,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
you can have
yeah,
a
yeah,
6-month course with an
yeah,
EMTB, and they'll give you an
yeah,
ambulance, and you can be the
yeah,
person that arrives within 5 minutes, who's in communication with a physician from the local hospital, so you can provide so you can start to you can start to get that service provided in 5 minutes. You had mentioned something earlier about how pumping resources into the VA has proved inefficient. Part of the reason why that is because when they pump resources into the VA, they're like, we're only going to hire a PhD level psychiatrists. We're only going to hire more doctors. So the money doesn't actually stretch that far. But if you pump the resources in to include a rapid response force, right, similar to an ambulance force in the mental health space, where it's manned by veterans, right? The people who had
mhm,
successfully graduated through
yeah,
the program. So it would, in my experience, one of the biggest not criticisms, but word is close enough. I remember speaking with an Army Ranger who had done 9 tours, right, sniper, um, and he had gone to the VA. Right, and he goes to the VA for psychological sessions, and his psychotherapist, 28 years old, right, fresh with a brand new PhD, bubbly,
liberal arts
happy,
educated.
little bunny
Yeah,
rabbit, like had been
yeah,
top of their class, went to great
yeah, yeah,
universities, has had a great
yeah, yeah,
untarnished life, and there's no connection.
yeah,
None.
yeah,
Zero. This person has all the right credentials, understands all the
yeah,
right theories, but there's no way for there to make a connection. That same individual could speak to an actual veteran, preferably from the Ranger Corps or the Special Forces Corps at large, who has 6 months training in psychotherapy, who works with that same bubbly therapist, right? You don't even have to like replace the psychotherapist. But the initial interaction is with somebody who, as soon as the ranger looks at him, is like, you get it. And the ranger person's like, I've been there. Like, I
yeah,
went into hell. I came back. I'm going into hell with
yeah.
you to pull you back. Like, that element of it is something that can be created in the VA system, like
Okay,
in theory. I mean,
okay.
theoretically,
So
yeah.
Dan, it was. under Trump in his first administration. And I have a friend down. I won't mention her name because right now it bloody well just escapes me because I looked for it. Because anyways, we do have these. There was funding lines. It was a special funding line through the VA for contract service treatments outside the VA, but the funding came through the VA. What happened is VA leadership went to war with that because these providers, who were mostly all veterans and veteran networks, were succeeding. And they were using, non-pharma, because the heavy focus, in our community, the thing that we hate the most is pharma. We hate it the most. Having to go on a drug. I don't even like to take ibuprofen or Tylenol. One, because I've got toxicity built up, over the years, and most of us do. But the other is I don't like to take a pill. I need to, sometimes you have to, and just the way it is. Right? But, and we've watched our buddies go on these pills and kill themselves because they went in, and then it was one pill, and then it became 3 pills, and then 7 pills. And the guy that got me into that program down there in Mexico, he was on 15 drugs.
Wow.
15, all VA, before he finally, found the right person, got him started on the right path, et cetera. And he takes none now. Right. So there was a funding process. I can't remember the name of the process, but the VA leadership went to war with it. And who helped and supported that? Senior ranking military officers.
Got it.
Right? And congressionals, et cetera. And so these things, and by the way, this was happening again in the post-Vietnam, not so much during Vietnam, but in in 1974, 75, into, I would say, the late 70s. I remember this as well, because there were some folks out of Stanford. We were in San Francisco, folks. Anyways, that's an aside. But the point is that these things have been tried several times. And then what happens is the bureaucratic machine of the VA and its overlap with, various DC and Wall Street, et cetera, entities, make sure that the program dies on the vine.
But the question that I have, right, is that because I have felt that the longer I am in this space, the reason why it's so frustrating is that you speak when you're at the ground level, right? Like the bureaucracy, you're not at the top levels of the bureaucracy, but you're actually at the people who are in the trenches. You can start to imagine how the system can be restructured for optimization, and then as you start to reach out to the people that have the authority to implement optimization, you might actually at the very, very top get some support, right? But then there's this middle management
operational layers. Yeah, it's called the operational layers. And the problem is, like the book I wrote, The Eternal War. If you are a resentful person and you are resentful most against people who sacrifice for others because you don't have that in you, and you want to harm people like that, where would you go?
Oh, into the bureaucratic management.
Go into the administration of some entity that has some ability. And this is the same with teachers, by the way. There's a lot of teachers, and these studies are coming out more and more now. A lot of teachers hate kids. But they go into teaching because then they can harm a kid. They can harm kids, as many kids as they can every day.
A lot of them, they don't have kids.
Right? The same with administration and universities and all kinds of things. So this is the resentful. So I want to,
but just real quick point of clarification, right? So that's not so much like, those individuals are not externally corrupted, right? They're internally. They're internally corrupted, correct. Right? Okay. That's
correct. No. That's absolutely true. Now, what it does do, though, is what it provides you is a cadre of people who are in decision-making, influence positions internally that should an external force say, hey, we want to do this, you have the plumbing to bring about.
They're already naturally aligned.
Correct. And you don't even need to give them guidance because they already, all you got to do is give them an idea of, have you thought about doing it this way? Or, hey, here's an argument for why this, a legitimate argument.
You plant the seed, like you activate the cell that already exists.
Correct. So let's go back to treatments, right? Let's go back to these, the use of psychedelics. 2 things. one, again, going back to the early 70s, I've seen people have amazing experiences, amazing life changing, and then 3 to 5 years later, out of nowhere, kill themselves. Psychedelics alone are not enough, and the experience is not enough. There's a whole lot more. And I, again, with the NFIM, National Foundation for Integrative Medicine, and having come through my own 6, 7 year journey, and I still get humbled every once in a while when I realize that I'm still neurologically. I never had the PTSD stuff, or not that I know of. But I still stumble with the neurological stuff. And one of those things, and you never know, because I just turned 59, so you never know if you're just getting older, or or you took one too many hard knocks to the head, or some combination. But one of the things that that I've been working on, the Buffetts helped Nova Foundation invested in this for about 6 months, and then funded the work for another year, is identity stack development. In addition, that coincides, and this is what that therapist that you and I both know in common is, she does very well. She gets right to the core of who you are, right? And then she gives you permission to be who you are, right? So high performing people, their identity is a thing that started to develop when they were just little children. And it develops around our ability to push the boundaries, and not only, even when we fail, to learn something from it, then re-push that boundary and push through it. And when you've had substantive head injuries, and we build a stack of identities around that. This is who I am in this context. This is who I am in this context. This is how I respond, is probably a better way of saying it, in these various different contexts. And those are different, very, very different. There's a whole layering and stacking of those. Well, when you've incurred sufficient enough brain injuries, no amount of psychedelics are going to be able to put that person back together, because that all of that gets encoded bioelectrically, and that complex set of bioelectrical fields and signals is forever changed. And so one of the things that has to coincide is not just the spiritual experience, but there is real no shit psychological work you need to do on who am I in these contexts? What am I actually now capable of doing? What boundaries can I push? How much can I push them? What boundaries can I, what hard things can I no longer do and I can no longer push? And how do I let my sense of myself go without, without too much of a sense of loss? And one of the things that happened for me is I realized I had died 8 years before, which is when I got the first major series of head injuries. I had died 8 years before, and I've been dragging a corpse around. And this is after the treatment down in Mexico and some other things, neuroendocrine rebalancing and some bioelectric rebalancing. I realized that I was dragging a corpse around, hoping that one day, like the people do the cryogenic stuff, hoping that one day we're going to be able to do a full reset. And I realized that guy died.
Yeah. It's a transition.
Yeah, that old EMs, that guy's dead. He's never coming back, right? And it's I don't know, I've never thought of it this way. Maybe it's a little bit of a near-death experience, just not a pleasant one, right? Give me 1 second. So point I'm trying to get at is this. I'm a big supporter of the psychedelic space. It's got to be done extraordinarily carefully. It needs to be done with people that you truly know and trust, because there's so many deceivers in the space.
Yeah.
Right? So many deceivers.
With what you just mentioned about the deceivers, that was the second point that I was going to bring up earlier, and I wanted to make sure we talked about that.
Go ahead.
Is I have seen the deceivers as well, right? Is that because when I started setting up churches for people in this space, which is getting people to a quasi-regular status, right?
Yeah.
I had to be very selective of the people that I would set up churches for, because I refused to set up any type of organization where it was a singular person at the organization because for lack of a better term, Jesus complex, Messiah complex,
Anchor
is
complex.
prevalent in this
Yeah.
space. So there
Yeah.
has to be some type of internal regulatory system where it's multiple people that could check on each other. Because if you have any one person at the top, it's ripe for abuse. But the general point that I was going to make earlier is that one of the saddening components for me about this space being entirely illegal outside of the limited religious context that could be legal, that could be legal, is whenever you have demand for something and it's illegal, you have black market space. And in black market space, you have the natural attraction to deceivers and
Sociopaths.
nefarious and
Yeah.
sociopaths and
Yeah.
manipulators and all the whole 9 yards, right?
Yeah.
And the main reason for why I haven't been able to just give up on taking on the progress for this is that it needs to be removed from the shadows to be able to deal with the deceivers and to have the oversight panels and the review and all of those different components, because we've seen exactly what it is that you're describing. But the longer it stays in the darkness and the shadows, the more that it will naturally attract those nefarious types that
Yeah.
are taking advantage of people who are fundamentally vulnerable.
Well, and people who are in a space that they know virtually nothing about because there's no public, we don't have, so I benefited when we were up in Washington, starting mid 70s into, again, late 70s, early 80s. Um, we did sweat lodges when I was a kid. We did all of the, native stuff, with Crow, Blackfoot, Nez Perce, Shoshone, Snoqualmie, that whole number of different tribes. Again, my mother's unique lady. Um, but this was the community we're in. And so you get to see the different practices that were around, the different ritual practices that were around the actual ceremonies. And I was too young to actually do anything beyond the ceremony and none of the molecules and stuff, because they wouldn't let kids do it, because the natives know that kids aren't ready.
Yeah.
They're not in that space unless there's some emergency because the kid's dealing with addiction or, some other major psychological issue. But even then, it's village elders. Anyways, point is that we don't know enough about these things because they've been systematically and intentionally removed from our collective consciousness. And so we're naive and we're too susceptible then to the deceivers, whether they have a PhD or an MD PhD,
Yeah.
or they're
Yeah.
just some, very alluring sociopath.
And you mentioned the kind of the first peoples, right? The traditions that are still around in some
Yeah.
smaller communities.
Yeah.
One of the beautiful things, the benefits that I've had in getting exposed to this space, and also coming from the background in law and being able to put words towards abstraction, is I was invited to meet with elders from ayahuascan traditions in the rainforest,
Mm.
who still live actually in the rainforest, like unbroken line of shamans. And I remember when I was speaking with them, I said, what's the difference from your vantage point between medicine and a sacrament? Right, because that has a there's a legal
Yeah.
significance
Yeah.
between a medicine and a sacrament, right? And I remember he laughed and he said that in our language, right, in our culture,
No separate.
we don't have two words for those,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
in your culture, medicine is fundamentally that which changes the physical but has no effect on the spiritual. And sacrament is that which affects the spiritual, which has no direct effect on the physical, for lack of a better terminology. And in their culture, those two concepts are fundamentally intertwined, which is much more of an Eastern concept where you
Yeah.
have to deal with the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual for true
Yes.
healing, which
Yes.
is a deficiency that the modern Western system has, which has turned it into this sees the physical almost as a commodity to be able
Yeah.
to
Well,
consume.
it comes out of the Nazi and
Yeah,
Japanese,
yeah.
and studies. Okay. So, Dan, brilliant. So, um, for me, and again, with NFIM and now the work we do with veterans, with athletes, with intelligence community, et cetera, high performing people, um, and then of course family members thereof, etc., is I developed a very simple model, and I have a paper somewhere if anybody
Sure.
wants it. Not a, it's a very simple paper that articulates it. It's not a formal research paper, etc. But there are, so my background's engineering, science and engineering, right, and electrical engineering particularly. Um, so I think in those ways, right? I think as an engineer, I think in the form of complex systems of systems. So the overall system that we're talking about is the human being, and that is a ludicrously complex system of hundreds of trillions of cells of 50 to 60,000 different cell species types, right? Um, Give me a second, all of which were, have dependencies and codependencies and are in direct conflict with one another, et cetera. Okay. So there are three systems. There's the biomolecular system, which is this, which is the machine and the machine processes. And those are happening at the subcellular level all the way up. Right. So that's the biomolecular, the chemistry of it. Then there's the bioelectrical, and those are the bioelectric fields within a cell, within boundary conditions like Dr. Noble talks about, but also on the cell wall, between cells, communities of cells, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the next layer, the bioelectrical level. Great work by Dr. Michael Levin at Tufts University on this. On the biomolecular, great work being done by Dr. Nick Lane, I think at King's College. All right. The third layer is the neuropsych level. And that is, so the biomolecular systems only exist to maintain bioelectrical fields. The bioelectrical fields out of the emergent experience from the bioelectrical fields and the computation, because the computations are happening at the bioelectrical field level, are out of that is what emerges our neurocognitive, neuropsychometric self.
Got it. Okay.
The identity stack, right? This complex identity stack. Each one of those is somewhat independent, but they're all totally dependent upon one another.
Yeah.
And the higher you go up in this, so you can do extraordinary things to directly impact the biomolecular. But if you don't also concurrently impact the bioelectrical and the neurocog, or neuropsychometric is a better term, then the neuropsychometric and or the bioelectric can dysregulate the biomolecular again.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so you have to address all three systems simultaneously. So identity stack stuff always,
Yep.
right? And that's part of that's just as simple as checking in on your buddy, and also
Yeah.
yourself. You even yourself sometimes then having the wherewithal. And I had an experience last weekend that I'm still kind of stunned by because it's not my nature, but I lost my cool. But fortunately, I was able to lose my cool, and probably the only reason I could is because I was among special operations guy,
Yeah.
a couple of special operations guys, and a certain pilot. Still, it still shocks me. I've never lost my cool like that. But the point is that sometimes the neurocognitive, the identity stack, it's easier to say identity stack than it is neurocognitive neuropsychometric, right? But sometimes you yourself have to admit, take a step back and realize, hey, I'm spinning out right now, or I'm in this kind of state or condition. I need to look at the bioelectric, see what I can do there, and then maybe there's some biomolecular augmentation that I need to do. The astounding thing is that if you work on the identity stack and the bioelectric directly, most times the biomolecular will fix itself without any need for external augmentation.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And at pretty much any age, and even with almost any extent of damage.
Got it.
Our cells are unbroken history of experiences that goes back 4.5 billion years.
Yeah.
Think about the untold numbers of quadrillions of experiences those cells' ancestors have gone through, because we're talking single cells in the lifetime spans of a single cell. We think in terms of 80, 90 years, that's a long stretch, and we can only change so much, but your cells have been through, in that same 80, 90 years. So let's say you're going through one life evolution in 90 years, but your cells have gone through 400, 500, 600, some cells more, like in the line of your mouth, et cetera. Okay. Anyways, So
and they've learned and evolved from all of the past
correct,
traumas,
correct.
experiences
Epigenetic
that your
memories,
ancestors have
genetic
gone through. Yep, yep.
memory. Yeah, right. So that's the other thing. What we're finding is that genetics matter less and less and less than we thought they did. They only code for proteins. And more
Mm,
importantly, they code for, and additionally, too, they code for protein production under certain kinds of external and internal circumstances. That's the additional
yeah,
DNA
yeah,
code. This is also gratefully why COVID didn't work so well and why the mRNA vaccines didn't have the kill off effect that they were hoping for. Now, unfortunately, it's harmed
yes,
millions and millions and millions of people, but
yep,
nowhere near the hundreds of millions that they were hoping for. Okay. The reason I go back to this three stacks, right? And identity is that psychedelics don't work the way people think they do. Now, do people need to understand the way in which iboga is directly impacts bioelectrical fields such that the biomolecular can reset itself? They don't need to
yeah,
know that so much, right? But it's true. You can test it. You can look at it. You can look at iboga under an electron tunnel microscope. It looks exactly like a signal rectifier, exactly like we build in semiconductors. Um, do we need to know that psilocybin doesn't work on the brain? It works on the microbiome and resets the microbiome. And then the microbiome then produces all the neurotransmitters, neuromodulators, and regulators that are necessary as if there was and you get this
yeah, yeah, yeah,
experience. Why? Because there's a back order
yeah,
for these
yeah,
these materials that the neurology needs
yeah,
and the overall neural system because you have two
yeah,
brains, et cetera. So point is,
yeah,
do people need to know that psilocybin doesn't work the way they think it does? It's actually
yeah,
resetting the gut? Probably
yeah,
not so
yeah,
much,
yeah,
right? But point I'm getting at is this: in order for us to be less naive and less susceptible to the deceivers, we need to understand that there are no joke chemical and electrical processes that are directed and driven by these molecules that we and other animals and insects, et cetera, co-evolved with,
yeah.
right? And if we can understand a bit more of the mechanisms by which these things function, we can still have the spiritual, mystical experiences.
Mhm.
Um, but what we need to understand is that in order to fix this, fix ourselves biophysically and bioelectrically, those aren't things that happen because we're having a mystical experience.
Yes, yes.
Right. And the other reason I say this is because the way in which pharma and the medical industry
Mm,
fools us is they come in and say, well, we've been able to, through a pill or an injection, we've been able to replicate that same action, that same process. And it doesn't. What it does is it just gives you temporarily a simulacrum or a
yeah, yeah.
homologue of the experience.
Mhm. The appearance of having a similar outcome,
Yes.
and then when you repeat it over and over again and it stops working, then you start to have the side effects, and
And
then
then
the
they
side
give you
effects
another drug
and
to, yeah.
deal with the side effects, and then you're on the hamster wheel,
Yes. And
and it's
now we look at MDMA and ketamine, great things.
yeah,
But it's interesting, MDMA and ketamine are now more and more on the scene. Why? Because once you screwed up all these other things, they'll still give you that feel good for a while. You'll still get that same kind of touchy feely,
yeah, yeah.
ketamine's one thing that's dissociative,
Mhm.
um, ketamine's history is extraordinary. There's a great book called Ketamine Dreams, written by an MD who experimented ketamine for 20 years.
Yep.
But, MDA, which then gets converted by the body, will
Mhm.
give you that loving, touching serotonin, bath kind of feel, pretty much no matter what's going on, however many other systems are messed up, but it doesn't change anything. And
Yeah,
it actually burns out more serotonin. And the
yeah,
ketamine is going to give you that dissociative, mystical, magical kind of experience,
yeah,
but it too isn't going to actually change anything.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. No, that's the part of the optimal research that wants to emulate the Minnesota starvation experiment,
Yeah.
comprehensive studying of each individual on like all domains,
Yeah.
would then subdivide like the individuals who are taking each of the different psychedelic categories, and then within each of the different psychedelic categories, it would be optimizing the different post-integrative, like what's the optimal environment in which you take it, like, and this is where one of the groups would be the ayahuasca groups, right? And then there'd be the ayahuasca taken in the clinical setting versus ayahuasca taken with the shamans doing their shamanistic routines. And my guess would be that if you see the ayahuasca taken in a strictly clinical setting versus taken in the rainforest with connection with nature, that you're going to see a substantial increase in the longer term benefits by using some of that wisdom that's been lost to our civilization, but still exists within the human race in pockets.
So give me 1 second. Have you ever looked at synth where you take a naturally occurring molecule in nature and perfectly replicate that synthetic, and where it has a 98% efficacy if it's from the original source, it has like 4 to 12% efficacy synthetic, even though it's the exact same molecule, exact same composition, exact same structure, molecular structure, and the exact same polarity.
No, I mean I haven't seen the research specifically,
Yeah,
but that what is it that rhymes, like that
yeah,
connects with my experiences. Like
yeah,
if I could go into a little bit of a side tangent story.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
This was again 2019, that summer where I'm getting introduced to all this stuff, meeting everybody. Um, I have a friend that is from agency, right? Like we went to high school together,
Yeah,
and I only found out because was staying at his house once, like in his basement. And he had a library, and I was just looking at what books he had in his library, and one of the books was upside down. So I was like, "Oh, that's weird. Let me fix that for him." And then when I pulled out the book, this card fell out, like the emergency contact card, so the
yeah.
family knows what to do in case of emergency, that kind of thing. And so, but he was always my buddy who he was stationed in Yemen, right? And
Mm,
I was having the downside consequences of the PTSD from my dad and all that kind of stuff. And so I just called him up saying like, hey, look, my trial canceled before or settled before the July 4th weekend. Can I come hang out with you in Yemen? I've never been there before.
yeah,
Like, I've been to
yeah,
50 countries, like an excuse just to go crash on somebody's couch. And I get this very out of character message from him saying that he's not in Yemen. He's like, fuck that place. Da, 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 da. He's in a hospital in London, right? And he sounded like completely out
yeah,
of it,
yeah, yeah.
terrible. Like eventually I talked to his brother who's with him, and he said that he had it was, it was similar to an appendicitis burst, except it wasn't it was an intestinal burst, like the
Oh,
similar,
wow.
like that led to like something got infected, and then it
Yeah.
led to a burst, and then
Mm,
all the consequences that come from that. And so I was like, look, I need to get out of here anyway. Let me just I'll catch a flight to London. I'll go see him in the hospital. Like I'll bring. We used to be lifeguards together. I'm like, I still have that stupid hat we used to wear. I'm like, I'll bring some like physical representation of our past, like some photos and stuff. Like
yeah.
that can help in healing. Like none of that will hurt, right? And then, so I go, I meet him there. Well, first, after my plane lands, I get this real long message from him saying, I don't want you to come see me like this. I don't want you to inconvenience yourself. He was just that kind of guy that would
Yeah, yeah,
never
yeah,
want
yeah.
anybody else to suffer because of he's suffering. But I was already there, so he cleared me. And then when I walk into the hospital, he looks like he's dead, right? Like
Mm,
his eyes
mm,
are like gone, right? And I just get this feeling of dread when I walk into the hospital because I'd never
mm,
seen him like this. This was somebody who
mm.
never touched drugs in his
Yeah,
life,
yeah,
type of
yeah,
a thing.
yeah. Yeah.
He's hooked up to a machine, and whenever I'm in that kind of environment, I don't say much. I just try to absorb all of the information that I'm seeing. Right, his brother's sitting next to him on the side of the bed, right, basically holding his hand. Nurse comes in, like is like, "Are you in pain?" Brother's like, "Are you in pain?" Like, if you're in pain, you just press the button,
Yeah.
right? And so like he's like, okay, and he presses the button. By this point, he's been in ICU for about 8 days or so, and he's pressing the button, right? And I'm like, so what is that? Just out of curiosity, he's pressing. He's like, oh, it's fentanyl, right? Uh, And I was like, interesting. He's on fentanyl. They're like, yeah, we started him off on morphine, but he had was having an allergic
Allergic
reaction to it, so
reaction, yeah.
we switched him
Yeah.
off to the synthetic, right? And this is exactly kind of what it is. Like, this is what triggered me in the story from what you're
Yeah.
describing, the difference between the organic and the
Yeah.
synthetic.
Yeah.
And so I'm just so I'm watching this, and then I see him click the button, right? And then his eyes roll back in his head, right? It feels like his spirit like leaves his body,
Yep.
and he just goes. He does it. He just goes through this process, right? And I'm just like horrified, like in my bones with this.
Yeah.
And so I'm just watching this, and I'm like, how long has he been here? And I'm like, oh, he's been here about 7 days. I'm like triggering research that I heard before, that every day you're in ICU, it's something like you have a 10% increase in
Yeah.
likelihood of not making it of passing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, so what's wrong with him, right? Like, why is he fundamentally, why is he in the ICU? And they're like, well, he has to stay in the ICU because his he can't process food, like his
Yeah.
intestines aren't working. I'm like, well, why is it that his intestines aren't working? Well, because he's taking opiates, right? If you take too many opiates, then the snake stops to be a
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
snake,
I know it
right?
well. Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, so what is it going to take for him to stop taking the opiates? And like, oh well, he's on a self-medicated machine, right? So he'll decide when he stops taking it. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, the research shows that if you put somebody up to an opiate, like if you put a mouse in front of an opiate machine and just let him push
Yeah.
the button, he's just going to push the button and
So they're
stop playing
dead.
with all his friends
Yeah.
and stop eating, and he's
Yeah.
just going
Yeah.
to die. So it's like you've just described to me a loop that he's going to stay in this hospital with that machine plugged into him until he squeezes the button until he dies.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What? And I'm like, oh, and I'm like, okay, it clicked with me. I know why this happened, because some doctor, right, probably told the patient you're not allowed to have morphine, and then the patient complained to the medical board, like you explained before. So the doctor gets reprimanded. So then the industry, right, it's like, okay, let's develop an industry standard where we, the doctors, aren't the ones that push the drugs. So we'll invent a machine and put the
We're
thing
not
in the person's
liable.
hand.
We're not
We're not
liable.
liable because now it's you putting the drugs in the hand when you should never
Oh,
allow a
by the
patient to
way,
sell.
whatever we did, treatment, surgery, whatever, we're not liable. No, he didn't die of that. He died of a self-induced. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm watching this, and it's like, look, the brother loves him to death, doesn't want to hurt him, and all
Yeah.
the nurses not trying to hurt him, and all these
Yeah.
people, and I'm just going to the side, and I'm like, he's gonna die here,
Yeah.
like he's gonna die here, and so I'm like when he came back, I'm like snapping in his face, I'm like, you just left, right?
Right.
When you pushed that button, you left, like
Yeah.
your soul left your body, and you do that too
Yeah.
many times, you're not coming back. Where I'm like, your wife and kids are back in the States. Right? Like, yeah. I'm like, you have to keep in mind that every time you press that button, they go farther away.
Yeah.
Your chances of seeing them ever again
Yeah.
go away. You have to think about that. And whoever told you that when you feel pain, then you take the drug after you feel the pain is lying to you.
Yeah.
If you need to like get up out of the bed and then go to the bathroom, so you're anticipating pain to come,
Yeah.
you can push the button before,
Yeah.
then go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
But you got a 12-inch scar. You got a 12-inch hole in your stomach. You're going to feel pain.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's not going away.
Yeah.
Like whoever told you that that's not going to be there, just lying to you. Like if I feel pain and I'm not, and I don't have a 12-inch scar on my thing. So I'm like, look, we're gonna do I'm gonna stay here for a couple. I was only gonna stay for 24 hours. I'm like,
Yeah.
we're gonna stay. I'm gonna stay here until this is done. And I wrote out on a piece of paper for him. I just gave him a little chart, and I'm like, before you do this, before you push that button, I want you to think about a couple things. One, that is this worth me not seeing my family for another couple hours or another couple days, right? I want you to think about that before you push the button, and I want you to think, is this absolutely necessary? Like, am I doing this before I'm going to am I doing this before I go to the bathroom or before I see pain? Or before I'm anticipating pain to come.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we're going to put a little chart on there. We're going to put it in 12-hour grids, and we're going to figure out if you're increasing the number of clicks per hour or clicks per day, or decreasing the amount of clicks per day. And when I asked the nurse this, nobody knew the answer to that. Like nobody knew how many clicks he had taken for the day.
Yeah.
And it turned out that first day, they thought that he was protected because the machine, once you take a click, it doesn't allow you to take another click for like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So when he was out of it, his hand would just involuntarily click. And they were like, oh, he's not getting that many extra clicks. And I'm like, I think you guys are looking at this all wrong. So it turned out that the day that I arrived, he took, it was 73 clicks.
Oh my God.
Right? Okay. The day before, he had taken 68 clicks. So he was actually, like when you mapped it out on
Yeah,
a
he's
chart, his
climbing.
click rate was climbing when I was walking in there, right? As soon as I I made a bet with the nursing staff. I was like, I can get, because they thought like, look, he's taking as much as he needs. And I'm like, no, he's an addict, right? Like he's
Yeah,
not, like he's
yeah,
never been an addict before, but he's an
yeah,
addict right now.
yeah,
And so I bet you I can get a 75% reduction in his click take, right? And then by the next day, just by having him with the grid and thinking about how each click pushes him farther away from his family, he dropped, I think it was 48, 42, somewhere in that range, right? Like almost a 50% drop. And I still wasn't happy with
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah,
Right. And
yeah,
so, but I just stuck there with the office. I stuck there with him and just kind of mapped it out. But 2 days afterwards, he was down to 12. When he was down to 12, his eyes were back to normal.
yeah, yeah,
His stomach became online. He was getting checked out of the ICU. They were able to wheel him out into the sunlight so he could
yeah,
get.
yeah,
And I remember that like on that day too, right? One of the military doctors stopped by, like U.S. military, uh, and I was talking to him just outside, and I'm in board shorts. Like
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
in board
yeah.
shorts, and
You're so
like it's
cowboy.
like
Yeah,
I'm here just to have fun. I'm like in flip flops, board shorts, and like a t-shirt type of
yeah,
thing,
yeah,
and like, but I'm hanging out like in the employee lounge with like the nurses and the doctors. The nurses were having the greatest time because I was correcting the doctor's work, and the nurses would just not like his main treating doctor had a good friend who was a surgeon, right? Who wasn't dealing with my guy, but like the surgeon was just ripping on the doctor. He's like, "You're gonna let some lawyer from California just like." Anyway, so I'm talking to this general. I'm not general.
medical doctor,
The
army
doctor
doctor.
from
Yeah,
the
yeah,
army doctor,
yeah.
and he the guy. I was like, "What do you think about these fentanyl pumps and this kind of stuff?" I'm like, "Look, what I saw in there was insane." And he was like, "I have to be careful with what I like.
Professional. Yeah,
I'm walking a very tight line here, right?
yeah,
Because we cannot in this is he's not my patient."
yeah,
So
yeah,
I can't intervene in
yeah,
here. I can't give orders here. Like this is not my domain. This is civilian space, X, Y, and Z. I'm checking in on him because we have an interest in making sure that he's okay and
yeah,
we want him to be okay. But let me put it this way. Like my wife broke her femur and as soon as she was out of the hospital, she took Tylenol.
yeah,
Right. Like she was on Tylenol.
yeah,
Right. Um, And so then he's like, thank you, right? Because you were in a position where you could just not,
yeah,
like, you
yeah,
didn't
yeah,
have
yeah,
those boundaries. You could just do what you wanted.
yeah.
And he had to sit there and just watch this like train wreck unfolding.
This is also
And
that to your point, right? This is business versus profession,
yeah,
profession, because as a adherent to the Hippocratic Oath, none of those doctors or the nurses, because if I remember correctly, nurses swear the Hippocratic Oath as well,
yeah,
would have allowed this to happen. They would have
yeah.
intervened. And
Well,
I know the
and the
pump
other,
well. I spent out of 18 months in the early 90s, I spent 11
yeah,
of them in the hospital with pancreatitis. And I
yeah.
remember the Demerol pump very well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I have to give credit for one of the nurses because in his wound, right? They had this new thing where it was like basically like a sticker that goes over the wound that
Yeah,
perfectly seals around the side, so you
yeah,
don't get
yeah,
any outside influence in there.
yeah,
And one of the nurses would intentionally remove that because they knew, and it was an old timer nurse, and
yeah.
they knew that in their experience, oxygen coming into
Yes.
there helps for the recovery.
Well, it
So
helps heal, but it also kills some of the microbes that would
yeah,
grow in there. Yeah,
it
yeah,
was
yeah,
just
yeah,
like it's like
yeah,
the superficial explanation to just keep it properly sealed,
yeah,
aiding in the recovery. They just weren't okay with that, and they knew that
yeah,
it wasn't. So they were putting themselves at risk
yeah.
to make sure that that happens. Uh,
Awesome
and I will say that the nursing staff was highly supportive of this experiment that I was running because they were trying to get to the right answer.
answer. Yeah, yeah,
They,
yeah,
they, they, the problem was that at every level of the system, they were so ingrained in you have to
in the
follow the
doctrine, in the doctrine.
protocol, right?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
it's the protocol matters. It's not the outcome that
yeah,
matters,
yeah,
right? It's
yeah.
like you can't deviate from the protocol. And when I walked in, and what I had seen or observed was, you guys know that protocol was written by lawyers.
Well, that's what I was just gonna
Like
say.
It's
Protocol's
like
there
that.
to protect the hospital. It's not there to protect the
Yeah,
patient or help
it's
the
a
patient.
liability.
Yes.
Like I'm
Yeah.
like
Risk
he's suffered.
mitigation. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I was like, this liability protection protocol,
Yeah.
because if it's official standard of care, then it's not malpractice
Yeah,
by
yeah, yeah.
following the official
Yeah,
standard of
yeah.
care, even if the outcome is terrible.
Well, and
So it's
exactly
like,
what you said. Also, whatever
yeah,
he's doing is self-induced. Well, that's on the patient.
the patient didn't have to click it,
No.
right? That's like, we're as surprised as anybody else that the patient just keeps clicking
Yeah.
this thing until he dies, and it's like, okay, well, yeah.
So
So that's
that's
just my,
so first off, Daniel, and I know
yeah,
this from our own experience together over the years, right? You are a very good friend, right? Very good friend. And also back to something I said at the very beginning of the conversation, you're also freaking brilliant. We're kind of running up on 2 hours or
yeah,
so, right? I want to touch on a couple other things and get your take on this because you've been in the guts of this space. So pharma will try to replicate the behaviors of the psychedelics. And they're going to, but they want to create synthetics that you're going to have to pay for at a fairly good price. And you'd have to use them in certain, under certain clinician practices, et cetera. But they won't work the same.
yeah.
Um, and they'll create the same, ultimately you'll wind up with the same problems of existing pharma, and they'll use it to discredit and drive you back to pharma, right? And what they will do is they'll invent or modify existing classes or psychotropics or, et cetera. We've seen them do this in other spaces like heart medicine, et cetera, where they make the argument, like there's, DMT, 5-MeO DMT, there's a synthetic version, and the argument for it is, and it doesn't work as well. Not even close to as well. And the argument they're making, and this is out of Denmark, I think, is where the synthetic comes from. So it's very well done. The Danes are really good at biochemistry or chemical engineering. But the argument they make is that it removes the toxins from the toad, right? The other toxins that come with it. And there's
Yeah,
some
yeah.
legitimacy to that argument, but the efficacy of it is dramatically less. And the longevity of it is dramatically less. So this is another way in which they get involved in the study, and they're the ones with the credentials, the PhDs, et cetera, and they'll send somebody, a think tank or somebody outside to go work on this at a university or something, right? Or trigger one of their little people. And then they'll get into the study and say, well, this is what you have to have in the study in order for it to be valid. And then what they're doing is they're working you towards, and they've been doing this in the marijuana space, by the way, where they've been trying to get to certain genetic strains of marijuana that then you have to buy from Monsanto, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So
yeah,
the
yeah.
point is that, if you want to have this certification validation that this is, et cetera. Okay. So this is one way in which, the very thing you want to see could get
Yeah,
derailed.
yeah.
And I'm articulating this with you because you're a very good attorney and you think through the legal arguments. Um, fundamental reason, there's two fundamental reasons why, however, the regime, the system, right? Again, this straight up Nazi, World War II medical industry, right? World War II horrible experimentation medical industry. There's two reasons why it will go to any length to not allow anything to change. One, we're talking tens of billions of dollars of revenues per year. And you're talking at least a couple trillion a year in market valuation improvement. That's a vast amount of money that they don't want to go away.
Yeah.
And they can, basically kill anybody on will if they want to with, what the medical industry does and has. The other reason, though, is something I really saw after the Vietnam War in the 1970s and into the early 80s. And then it got hijacked. And then, we went for Greed is Good and MTV and all this other stuff. But there were genuine concerns with population control because special operations and intel guys who were doing these treatments, which were completely illegal, that's why they were
Yeah.
happening up in the woods at our place in
Yeah.
Washington and elsewhere, um, these guys were waking up. They were breaking free of the illusionary world and
Yeah, yeah. They're
realizing
unplugging from the matrix.
they
Yeah,
were unplugging, and these are your most capable military
yeah,
intelligence kind of guys. And it's a very interesting thing that what saved my life, again, 2019, same time frame, was the special operations and intel community, certain key members in there. When I finally asked, when I finally admitted that maybe something was wrong, physically wrong with me, they jumped all over it and they got me to all these kinds of places and people I needed to, secretly, privately.
Yeah.
But that network, so that's 2019, that network had already been together for 10 years, 10, 11 years, because, and a couple of the guys, and you and I know one of them in particular, an older gentleman, right, who we both love to death. Some of the older guys remembered what happened during and after Vietnam, and that a lot of guys turned to drugs and alcohol and ended their lives or ended in horrible health, et cetera, because they couldn't get the treatments. And so when
Yeah.
the GWAT went and turned into our Vietnam 2.0, these guys said, no, we're going to take care of this ourselves. We're going to take care of
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I think the big reason that it stayed secret all this time, and we're talking more than a decade now, decade and a half, maybe, or close to, is because guys are waking up. And you can hear it like in Twitter threads and Twitter conversations amongst the special operations, et cetera, community, right?
Uh,
So for those two reasons, right, your most capable people checking out of the matrix and realizing they've been lied to. And when you have very capable, very intelligent people who've been lied to this degree and then have gone and done these kinds of things based off of those lies, and then we're living with the memory of doing those things. And now I'm also having to live with the fact that I realized that was all a lie, and I killed
yeah.
those
Yeah.
people in the middle of the night for a
Yeah.
lie,
Yeah.
right? Or I lost a friend, right? I
Yeah.
lost three
Yeah.
on 2012 trip. Um, you know, so again, one, there's vast amounts of money at risk, vast fortunes, and then the other is there is real power at risk. And so they'll do everything they can to ensure that this doesn't happen. And if it does
Yeah.
happen and they can't stop it, they will do everything they can using the bureaucratic
Deceptive.
system and processes to corrupt it right from the beginning. Right. So I want to share one other piece with everybody, and then we can kind of close out and any thoughts and
That's,
ideas you have. But
yeah.
um, to your buddy who was in, your school day chum who was in the hospital,
Yeah.
what we have to accept is that the brain and parts, so our nervous system and the cranial brain and the enteric brain and parts of our microbiome, which is this ludicrously complex community, are drug addicts. They are addicts, right? Our entire system runs off three drugs: serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. And there's variants of each one of those. Our whole system is a drug addict system. And whatever we do, so give me 1 second. Another thing that I've noticed, again, going back to the early 70s, is that most of our guys are guys that don't do drugs, won't touch drugs, won't do drugs. And
Yeah.
and then once everything else has failed and they've had enough trust from, the brotherhood, um, that they go and try one of these psychedelics and they have this extraordinary experience. One, because of the community, the brotherhood they're in, and then two, because they work. They have to be exceedingly careful that they're not just that the addict
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
responding to the drug and saying
Yeah.
and giving them enough of a concept and idea of success so that they'll go back and get more of the drug.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. One of the things that I've heard it described before is that if you want to conceptualize it as a ladder, like a tool that you use to get out from the hole, and the goal is to be able to put the tool aside and not
Very
use it
good.
again
Yeah.
unless you're in a situation
Yeah.
where it's required.
Yeah. 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 Where you back in
And
the hole. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and that's where, and you may be back in the hole too. Should be an expectation that you're going to fall in the hole at some point
yeah,
in your
yeah,
lifetime,
yeah.
but that's very different than a phenomenon that you were hinting at earlier too, which is like one of the big problems with modern pharmacology. I remember this when I had wisdom teeth removed, right? I end up getting prescribed some opiates of some kind, Percocets or
Vicodin,
something like
probably.
that.
Yeah, it's usually
So yeah,
Vicodin. Yeah,
some type of opiates, and I look at the bottle, right? I'm in university studying psychology at the time, and I look at the bottle, and it says take at the same time in the morning, and take twice in the morning and the evening, right? Like same time every day. And as I'm reading that, I'm studying about how your tolerance in the
yeah,
body,
yeah,
and if you take any chemical at a reliable time daily, your body will produce the anti
correct.
version of it and you build addiction.
Yeah,
And here I am reading the bottle prescribed by the doctor with a 30-day supply. And if I follow these directions to the letter, within 30 days, my body's going to be producing a chemical dependence
yeah.
on
Within
these
21
drugs.
days, it's about 21 days
Yeah,
normally.
no, but I'm
Yeah,
just saying like
yeah,
before I finish the
yeah,
prescription on the
yeah,
bottle, right?
yeah,
It's like the
yeah.
doctor just prescribed to me an
An
opiate
addiction,
addiction,
an
an
addiction.
opiate addiction. If I
Yeah,
just followed the rules, right? And it's like it's funny because I have extreme views on drugs like this because it's like I think every human being, I mean everybody in at least in America, right? But
yeah, yeah,
everybody should have a Xanax, like a
yeah.
singular
One.
one,
Yeah,
in their house, like a break glass in case of emergency. Your kid dies, or you have some kind of tragedy, or you're on the floor, like whatever that worst moment in your life
yeah, yeah,
is not the time for you to try to get yourself in your car and drive to the doctor to try to drive to the
yeah,
psychiatrist to be
yeah,
able to go through the process to
yeah,
get that and then to the pharmacy, right?
yeah.
But it should be one. And on the flip side of it, opiates. I don't think anybody should walk away with more than a 7-day supply of opiates, even, and that's for
Yeah,
people
three
who
to
are leaving
five.
after.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I mean, that 7 days is even on the
yeah,
high end,
yeah,
right? And so, yeah, just
yeah. The other, okay, so to that, I would further qualify what you just articulated. Another thing that we need to realize is that we have an opiate system in the body, receptor system, and we have a cannabinoid receptor system in the body. That's because we have evolutionarily co-developed with these plants, with these molecules, and so they're very important. However, um, and the same with the equivalent for the norepinephrine, which is, the methyl group, methamphetamines and cocaine, et
yeah,
cetera, right? um, one of the things that we have to realize is that we are all very, very different biomolecularly. Um, we also are very heavily coded to what latitude of the world that our ancestors come from during the last great, impact on their genes, which for
yeah,
for
yeah,
us Scandinavians, Northwest Europeans, or northern peoples is the last ice age. So where were our people when our genetic system and our epigenetic systems were the most heavily impacted? And that's the ice age. So what was the flora and fauna and the fungi, by the way, because right at that period in time. The point I'm getting at is that there is no one solution fits all, and different people have different reactions to the different receptors. So,
yes,
like myself, I'm one of like 4 to 7% of the populace. My cannabinoid receptors are reversed. So I have a extraordinarily adverse reaction to cannabinoids, or
interesting.
zero reaction at all. I
Yeah,
mean, it
yeah,
just doesn't
yeah,
bind, right?
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I don't remember what it is, it's like 4 to 7% of the population. Well, where do we?
That's really interesting that you mentioned that because I have one friend
Yeah,
that smoked marijuana once
yeah,
and fainted, passed out. Like this isn't somebody
yeah,
that has
yeah,
other health issues, but like
yeah,
color drained from his face,
yeah,
boom, hit the
yeah,
floor, and was just. And I'd never seen that reaction before, so it makes sense that there would be a
yeah. Okay.
subsection of the population that like has adverse reactions
Oh, it's
to.
horrible for me. Yeah,
Similar to how certain like Asian groups have
alcohol.
alcohol
Yeah,
alcohol
yeah. They
intolerance.
lack
Yeah,
the enzyme, right? So they
yeah,
lack the
yeah.
enzyme to break it down. Um,
Because their ancestry did not
correct,
co-evolve
correct,
for
correct,
that
correct.
adaptation.
No,
Yeah.
they can actually do alcohol, but it needs to be from their plants and in the normal distillation processes that's
Interesting.
local
Yeah, yeah,
there,
yeah.
right? The Western heavy duty alcohols from grains, et cetera, is not what their bodies can process.
That's the distinction. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But the reason I bring this up is Psychedelics are very powerful. They're very important, but they need to be part of, as you articulated, not just a ritual, but an overall, I need to fix these three systems: biomolecular, bioelectric, identity. I need to
Mhm.
fix all three of those systems concurrently. They're going to adapt and shift, et cetera. As well, though, not all psychedelics work for all people.
Yeah.
Right. And when it comes to psilocybin in particular, which is the one that's, kind of big right now, it
Yeah.
really does. This is a fungi. Fungi is very, very particular in the way in which it assembles the psilocybin molecule. And different fungi from different parts of the world that still have psilocybin can have a very different reaction in people.
Mhm.
So even the not all mushrooms are the same, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And the way in which they're processed, the materials that the molecules are built out, et cetera. So very powerful things. Some things are not going to work for some people because they're just not wired for it. The
Yeah.
receptors are wrong or other things.
Mhm.
Um, and even some things that might work, you're going to have different. And this is, by the way, nutrition too. So this is actually the work that we were doing was supplementation, right? So the kind of neuroendocrine rebalance naturally without taking
Yeah.
injections, naturally rebalancing your neuroendocrine system. Well, there's all kinds of plants around the world that can give you peptides, literally give you peptides that are bioavailable, right, et cetera, that can really help with, testosterone levels, human growth levels, all of that. What we were finding though, and then there's other, fibers and what we
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
finding is that people were having very different reactions to the exact same thing. And it was myself that was in the group. And then now we, through the foundation, et cetera, is like, I suspect this has to do with where our ancestors come from. So let me go find that same stuff, but from a provider in Norway,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
did. And boom, I had
Fascinating. Yeah.
much, much better reaction, much more supportive reaction, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So point being is these things are all great. There's a lot of
Yeah.
stuff in nature, but
Mhm.
our community that's all the cells that make our body
Mhm.
does come directly from the place from where our ancestors come from. And in order for us to get truly healthy, we need to match that nutrient molecule input
Yeah.
as much
Yeah.
as we can.
Yeah. Very similar to you're describing, like the Asian reaction, certain Asian people's reaction to alcohol. It's not alcohol; it's American alcohol
Correct. It's
or
Western. Yeah.
Western
Western.
alcohol,
Yeah.
and they can still tolerate the part because uh, there is there's a codependent relationship between your genetics and where those genetics evolved from,
Yeah.
like
So I wouldn't say
the
dependent, it's like
environmental factors. Yeah.
coevolutionary, right?
Coevolution,
Coevolutionary.
coadaptation, not
Yeah.
coevolution.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of those people may not be able to handle alcohol because they didn't deal with, the social reasons we go to alcohol. Maybe their
Yeah.
ancestors didn't go to alcohol for that,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like down in South and Central America, it's
Yeah.
more the plant stuff, right? In the
Yeah.
tropics, I should say more in the tropics. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they're incredibly fascinating point that you had before, right? So, um, I was never like a chakra crystal person,
Yeah.
like one of the people from like that woo woo space,
Yeah.
right? But after being around the psychedelic space for about 10 years, right, it's like you have in that kind of diagram that talks about your different energy levels, and this ties into something that you were just saying,
Yeah.
right? You have your I used to always describe that your DMT would be like your third eye chakra, right? Your LSD would affect your cerebral component. Your MDMAs focus more on your heart,
Mm.
right? And your psilocybin would focus on your gut, right? And you earlier were describing that you've got the psilocybin doesn't actually it's not so much affecting you as it's affecting your
Biome.
microbiome.
Yeah.
It's affecting your gut, which
Yeah.
is then changing the chemicals that fundamentally affect your
Yes.
body, right?
Yes.
And and that but through that spectrum too is that not everybody is having a dysregulation with each one of those different domains,
That's
right?
it.
And
Yeah.
and this was something that would occur with my ex when it was like an LSD therapy, right? Was that for me it'd be incredibly like visual, it'd be
Yeah.
incredibly like introspective, it'd be incredibly illuminatory. But for her, she almost got zero effect from
Yeah.
it,
Same with me.
right?
Yeah.
And it was just one of those things where it was very likely from my personal chemistry had some type of a deficiency where that where that allowed for the regulation for it. But for her, she was already in
Yes.
stasis or homeostasis
Yeah.
with that, and just did not. It just was not unnecessary. There was nothing to be repaired or out of balance. That would
Yeah.
be
Yeah. No, very good, Dan. I'd like to get your take on this, and I think then
yep.
we close up because my
Wrap up.
bladder's got to get empty.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Um, Give me a second. I am now 59 years old. I've been around this since I was born. Okay. Um, there is a hard ironclad rule in all of these things. At some point, you need to do the sophisticated work on all three of those levels on yourself such that you don't need these external inputs anymore. At some point, because our biomolecular system, right, our cells are unbelievably complex and they produce these molecules themselves, right? So at some point, we have to get ourselves to a place where I can get into the same state, but without the need for the inducement, the external inducement. And when you're in that place where you can do that, then you've actually repaired your system,
Yeah.
right?
100% agreement, and I think that's the perfect place to wrap up. Right, is that I was talking to a Vedic meditation
Mm.
guru, right?
Mm.
And he had approached me because he had no psychedelic experience, but he had heard about the relationship between psychedelics and meditation to be able to kind of deliver you to the same space.
Yeah, yeah,
And after the weekend that we had prepared with him, we had the deep heart to heart. And the way he explained it was it's similar to like climbing to the top of a pyramid. And the psychedelics will give you the jetpack, the shortcut.
yeah, yeah,
And it's more chaotic,
yeah,
right? And like you
yeah,
bump your head along the way on the way to the top.
yeah,
But it's fundamentally an experience that you can get to through discipline and meditation,
correct.
through
Yes,
through
yeah,
and so it's not something that can only be reached through the pharmacological exterior. You
yeah,
have the tools within you to get there. Sometimes it is helpful to be able to see what the pathway looks like, uh, and then it becomes a little bit. Uh, you're not just taking a step up the pyramid, up the mountain in blindness, not knowing if you'll ever get to the peak.
yeah, yeah. That's brilliant, Dan. For me, the way I articulate this very concept, and I think this is very important, is that we don't know what is possible sometimes, and our society, and this gets back to something we said earlier. Our society and our culture used to, not so long ago, tell us of these things that were possible. But really, since the medical industry, really over the last century or so, century and a
Yeah,
half, where we've all been super sciencey, and I'm not talking woo woo because again, I'm a scientist
yeah,
engineer through and
yeah,
through,
yeah,
right? Um, because we don't hear of these things, like you and I have both been. I've never done ayahuasca. I probably never will, but um, you more so than I. But well, that's not true. I've had all these woo woo people around my whole
yeah,
life,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Um, most people have not had the benefit of these types of conversations. They've not had the sweat lodge experiences when they were a kid. Even though you're not doing the molecules, you're part of the experience and something else is going on there that once, you're stable enough and old enough, you can participate in. Most people don't even know these things exist. And so sometimes, and that you can get into this state that this is a state you can get into. So
Yeah, yeah,
I don't begrudge anybody that they go have a healthy experience. And particularly if
yeah.
somebody's in a very, the iboga saved my life. Literally, ibogaine saved my life. I've been meditating for 40 years at that point,
Yeah,
very
yeah, yeah.
seriously, right? But I was so broke physically, neurologically, neuroendocrine system broken that there was no other way I could get into that meditative deep state, into that. So if you are genuinely broken, go find somebody who can do this the right way and figure out what's right for you. If you're not broken, at the physical level, but you still need to you need to be able to get into a meditative state, and you've never been able to get there in any other way, and you don't have 30 years to figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
This is another great way to know, oh, hey, I can be in this cognitive, neuroemotive, neuropsychological space. It's possible. And then you get to work in your everyday to try and live your life as a meditation, so that if you need to get into one of these states, it doesn't take too much. Right. So,
And I will say this too, again, for anybody who's considering it who hasn't before, um, you want to take this as seriously as possible, right? Is that the as much as I'm a huge proponent for almost the legalization of all forms of drugs, um, all drugs, people should realize that all like drugs are like firearms,
yes.
right?
Yes.
Each one is brilliant and amazing for what it
Yeah.
does. But a sniper rifle is very different than a 9 millimeter, which is very different than a flamethrower, which is very different than a tank,
Well,
right?
and to your weapons analogy, like drugs are like weapons. Yes, there's a round in the chamber and there's no safety.
Well, that's what I was just going to get at too,
Okay. Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's like you can use it. I mean, you can use it in a safe way that
Yes.
accomplishes its
Yes.
mission.
Yeah.
But also, you can take your sniper rifle and just start running out in the field, shooting it up in the air, and then you're gonna it's not gonna accomplish the goal
Yes.
that it was
Yeah.
intended for,
Yeah.
and two, it's gonna make everything worse. Like there's gonna be potentially dangerous outcomes that come from it.
Yeah.
This is where the regardless of which one you're trying to experience. You can look up online for ayahuasca dietas.
Mm.
Okay,
Mm.
and the whole idea behind the ayahuasca dieta is you should prepare for 3 to 4 weeks before you go into the experience, and you should have a mentally you should have a you should that is a bit what we were talking about earlier when we were talking about the trance space. So that if you want to be even approved for this, you should be at least going 3 to 4 weeks, making sure your diet doesn't include certain types of things that will have a negative impact on the experience, whether it's a numbing impact or some other issue, right? So you work on your diet, you work on your meditation going into it, you work on your journaling, your intentions. Why are
And
you doing this
I
in
would
the
talk
first
to
place?
somebody
Right?
like that
Yeah.
shared therapist that you and I both know. I would talk for
Exactly.
months, and
Talk to somebody
yeah,
who's been
yeah,
to the mountaintop.
yeah.
If your issue is you're stuck in hell, talk to somebody who's been to hell and come out of it, right? But the main point that I'm trying to emphasize is that there are guides that you can do to have a 30-day preparation going into it and a 90-day preparation going out of it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of the issue is people are concerned that there's going to be a quote unquote bad trip. But bad trips don't just come out of nowhere, right? Bad trips are fundamentally as you lose control of ego and you lose control of self as you go through this space, you lose sight of the fact that your body is going through a chemical reaction to the something that you put in your body. So there is going to be a time frame involved. Certain things or certain substances are going to have a 30-minute time window. Certain are going to have a 3-hour
Half
time window.
life.
Certain are going to have a
Yeah.
12-hour time window,
Yeah.
right? But if you're getting on a flight from London to Los Angeles, that's a 12-hour time window. If you start freaking out in the air because you don't like to fly, I mean, you have two choices. You can have 12 hours of you just screaming at the wall, making everybody around you uncomfortable, or you can have a plan to move forward where you meditate on the fact that the experience you will come back down. Like your body will process whatever the substance is. So your preparation going into it and your preparation going out of it can absolutely maximize your outcomes. And on the flip side to it, if you do absolutely zero preparation at all and don't understand that you like there are circumstances where you could reset good patterns that you have developed for yourself, and that those good patterns can be reset, and you can lose those good patterns by not consciously reinforcing those good patterns after you go through the experience. So it's a hugely the potential upside is huge. But also, it's just like any other drug, whether it comes from a white coat or whether it comes from the street. All drugs are dangerous,
Yeah.
and
Well, for me, Dan, again, going back to the early 70s, I've seen people spin out, and I've seen people spin out where they never recovered. So so again, I'm not recommending this for anybody. We're just having an informative conversation. Um, I have watched people spin out. I've watched people get into a paranoid, terrified space that they never recovered from their entire life. Right. And that sometimes it's somebody does too much or they did it too much, or somebody did it one time, but to your point, they weren't prepared or they didn't do it in the right way. They didn't, they weren't prepared because you are going into your brain. You are going into your sense of yourself as a human being and your place in the world. Nobody should ever approach that lightly.
Yeah, well, and that's why I like I like to hammer it through the analogy of like treat them like they're firearms, right?
Yeah.
Because you can,
Yeah.
it's like, hey, this is your first time with a firearm. Oh, you
Yeah.
shot yourself in the leg, right? It only
Yeah.
takes one. It only takes once.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean you're going to shoot yourself in the leg, but like anybody who's ever been on the shooting range for the first time, like, what's rule number one? It doesn't matter if the gun's loaded or not. You don't point it at another human being, right? Like it's like
So I'm
the
gonna put it slightly different. You pull the pin on a grenade, you're still holding the clip, you're still holding and you still
yeah,
got the pin. You can put it back up to a point, and you don't want to let go of the right. Yeah.
yeah.
Let's leave it there, my friend. It's good talking to you. Please give my
Beautiful.
regards to the beautiful wife, and
Will do.
we'll talk soon.
Hope all's good with the family.
Yeah.
And then next time we'll do Hollywood.
Awesome. Let's do it. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Hollywood
Thank you.
2.0. Yep.
Yep.
Take care, brother.
Love you.